Hey, Michael. Hey, can you hear me? I think you're on mute, Ryan.
Morning.
Good morning. How you doing?
How
You getting any sleep?
I am actually.
How's that managed?
Well, so Dammy's mom is here. So she's waking up she's taking him at like 7 and letting us sleep another hour. So we're getting like an extra hour in the evening, in the morning. And then he's actually like sleeping at 3 hours a time here and there between feedings. So I can't explain it, but
Yeah, don't knock it.
no, I'll take
I've
what I
got,
can get.
I've got our 1.5-year-old grandson in
All
visiting
right.
us, so
That's nice.
I have an appreciation for you
Yeah.
folks.
Yeah.
That was Yasmina. I was in Costco the other day, asked me to pick up diapers, right?
Uh-huh.
So for a second, I thought you meant for me, but
Right.
right. And the last time I literally bought diapers were over a quarter of a century ago.
Wow.
25 was over 25 years ago.
Yeah.
I was like, oh man,
I'm swimming in them right now.
there you go. And
It's
so
endless.
this morning, I let everybody sleep, and his name is Harry. Little Harry woke up, and
Hmm.
he had a full diaper, so I changed the diaper. And everybody was like, oh wow. Yeah, well, this is the first rodeo.
Yeah.
Good, good.
Like
Business
riding a
good
bike.
for you? Who else do I got? I got Logan. Hang on one second. Here. I think Michael is on.
I'm here.
There you go.
I was just going to
There
remind you. I was just going to remind you that you're recording as you continue to talk about diapers.
Yeah. Am I recording? Should I shut that off? How do you want me to record, Michael, or not? It doesn't really
No, I
matter.
think once you get, I think I'd shut it off, but then I'd start again once you get into the content.
Got it.
I know. I'm pretty sure that Logan.
Recording. So hey guys, thank you for joining. Let me see, what do we got here? We got 1, 2, 3, 7 of us. Thanks. Betsy, it looks like we got a couple of video and microphones off, so I appreciate that. If what I kind of wanted to do was just kind of chime in real quick. I don't really have a set agenda for this conversation. What I wanted to try to do is talk a little bit about the difference, at least that's the thought I had, the difference between an existing or contract to purchase for an existing home and new construction contract. Does that sound like a good path, guys? I got a thumbs up from Michael. If everybody is okay with that, okay, how about giving me a thumbs up? All right, so let's see if I can figure. So my Zoom expert, aka Yona, is out walking my grandson. So hold on a second. So let's see if I can do this. So by a show of thumbs up, how many that are on here have ever done a new construction contract before? You can just hit a thumbs up in your little chat box there.
Kind of.
Okay. So there's two types of new constructions, and I think this one will talk a little bit more about the production side of things, such as the Stanley Martin and the Ryans and all those kind of things. And then maybe tomorrow, or maybe next Thursday, we'll talk about the custom stuff, contract. Does that kind of make sense to you guys? Okay.
Yeah.
So let me see if this works. So let's see. Did anybody see my screen? Hold on a second. 1,
We see new to working from home. There you go.
Hey, look at that. All you got to do is follow the directions, Michael. Who knew that was possible? You are now sharing your screen. So is everybody familiar with this contract? Has anybody looked at it before and want to walk through it a little bit? So the major difference between an existing home and this particular, I apologize, I got unimproved property. I picked the wrong one, guys.
I was going to say, wait a minute.
Hang on. Let me see if I can do this better. If I can do this better. There we go. So this one actually says it's the Blue Ridge Home Builders Association, but the VR contract is pretty much the same. And I'm actually gonna buzz you through an actual contract that we're currently running on this. But the big principle on this, at the end of the day, this really ends up similar to a residential contract for purchase. So what you're doing in this particular case is your client is sat down with, let's say, Stanley Martin or Ryan or whatever it is. They picked out a lot, they picked out a plan on it, and then we're going to start talking about, the house, the lot, and features and conditions and stuff like this. But at the end of the day, they're going to give them some sort of deposit, and at the very end of the contract, you're going to basically, your client's going to give them a check or lend cash or through a lender, and then you're going to get a set of keys. So the closing process on the back end is very similar. Custom is very different. There's a draw schedules. The contracts are very different. It's different from builder to builder. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. But those who have not had an opportunity to buzz through this, I would encourage you to take a read through it. It has a lot of similar language to it, but the contract basically should include several components. So let's talk about that here for a second. Okay. All right. So this is a project that or contract we're doing with a builder in Louisa County. This may look a little different than the one I just did. So this is actually the VR version of the contract. So we have in our system 2 new construction contracts, the Blue Ridge, which we can use, and the VR. The format may look a little different, but they say exactly the same stuff. So the basics is the same as before. We're going to know who we are right up in the beginning of it. Where, look at that. So real property, we're going to have a purchase price. We're going to have a deposit just like our regular contract. In this case, we were going to give a deposit within 5 days of contract ratification. Let's see if I can figure out how to do that. So there's a financing contingency. In this particular case, we're going to have a pre-qual letter a little further down. And if there's any particular portion of this that you guys want to stop, just somebody, unmute themselves and ask a question as we're coming along. I'm going to buzz through the first part of this, pretty simple, because the back end of it is where the most important part of this is. This case, it's that we have a typical loan commitment period. So what did I do here? Yeah, there you go. So time, right? That's usually a big thing, right? In this particular case, it was a spec house that got started and our buyer bought it in the beginning of it. Sometimes, we don't know when it's going to start because they have to get building permits and therefore we don't know when it's going to end. In this particular case, it already started. So we knew when the construction started and we know when they're going to complete because we started on negotiations with the builder. And I guess before I get too far into this end of it, so we all have buyer broker agreements with our clients, right? Everybody's shot their head yes, right? We don't take people out, or we make sure they have their buyer broker agreement. And one of the things that's critical with new construction is that you write in your buyer broker agreement, and you can reach out to the owner. She has great language for it. But you know, FSBO and new construction. So before we get too much further into this, one of the key things of working with your client, and Lee was talking about this, is get to know your client, communicate with your client, pick up the phone, right? It's great to use as my webcam, which is what I'm doing now, but it actually uses as a phone. So you want to communicate with them a little bit on that, because and maybe Michael will chime in and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's been my experience that if your client, and I'll use the term go off the reservation, let's say they don't tell you they're going to Ryan, they don't tell you they're going to Stanley Martin, and they start getting into the process without communicating with you, this is why it's so important to stay in contact with your client, you may be cut out of the deal, because they're not obligated to say, oh, hey, by the way, are you working with a real estate agent? Or they're not obligated to do that. You know, at the end of the day, that rep represents that builder. It doesn't represent your buyer. So what Yona and I do is we try to make sure we understand our client as quickly as possible, understand what they're looking at. If they're tossing a pretty big net, which includes new construction, you know, we're going to want to make sure we know where they're going. And then it's a simple phone call. You pick up the phone, you call up Stanley, you call up Ryan, or whatever it is, and register your client. Once you do that, then you're good. But, you know, that's a super important part of a new construction process of it. So if anything you take away from this class or this little chat is everything I'm about ready to talk to is great, but if you don't know your client and what your client is who they're communicating with, you got to make sure that you're registering your client. And sometimes what I have done, if they're saying, yeah, we're looking at new construction, we really don't know what we want to do, and we're looking at maybe Ryan or Stanley Martin, I immediately reach out to both of them. Say, hey, this is a client, they're going to be sniffing around, this is their name, we're their agents. If they contact you, please give us a call so we can help you through the process, help our client through the process, and help you through the process. All that.
Keith, real quick. I mean, what you're saying is exactly true, and it just happened this week with one of our agents that somebody went out, you know, renegade, and we're trying to reel them back in, and that's why it's so important. This is a real reason, important reasons why you do have the exclusive right to represent form signed when you're first talking to them, because when you get to that blank and you put in, and I'm putting it in the chat right now, all residential property, including new home construction, land, and homes offered by sale for offered by owner, it's in there. And then they go, wait, why do I need you for new construction? And you can have that conversation right at the front. So you can't, it's not like a, you know, oh, I didn't know. You're dealing with it straight up and explaining. And as you go through to this time and next week, you'll have reasons as to why they want to use you in those places, that you are worthwhile in the process. So great point, Keith.
Yeah, and that, you know, really that's a lot that we should be talking about today is what value do you bring to the table to represent new construction? And it's the same value you bring with anything else that we do as real estate agents. Personally, I got a bit of a different twist on it because of my personal background, but the reality of it is there's nobody protecting you, right? There's nobody really looking out for your best interest, because that salesperson that sits there, even if they have a real estate license, in some cases they do, they work for the builder. They don't work for you. So it's kind of this weird thing, right? You know, as Michael and Yona and I believe in this wholeheartedly, I think Michael will echo this. You know, we don't believe in dual representation. Right? We do designate it all day long, but dual representation is just a typical thing. So at the end of the day, that's what they're going to do. And one of the things is there's always problems in a regular real estate transaction. When you're building something, and there's some folks on this chat that know this better than others, there's always an issue that pops up. And then the question becomes is, well, hold it, whose best interest are you looking after, Mr. Builder or Mr. Builder's rep? So that's the real reason they want to do that. And the way I usually explain it to them, particularly with the production guys, you're paying for it anyway, right? You're paying 3%. That's baked into their numbers. When we talk tomorrow, next Thursday about custom guys, that's not necessarily the case. And that conversation has to happen in the very beginning. How are we going to get compensated? But Stanley Martin Rye and Atlantic, all the big guys, Southern, so forth and so on, they have baked into the house price our 3%, or I think, Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, I think some attached product are now going out at 2.5 or something along those lines.
It could be as low as 2 on some.
Okay.
So you have to be, and again, you need to know, you got to know, don't be surprised after the fact. That's why you go to the MLS and look at the offer of compensation. The builders, they're not going to do anything about it, but you just need to understand. And if you think you're worth 3%, and as newer agents, it's harder to do, but as experienced agents, if you think you're worth 3%, then you got to have that conversation with them as well. That if it's less than 3, we're gonna have to have a conversation as to how I'm going to be compensated beyond that. But that's for another day. Let's not get wrapped around the axle on that.
So I hope that's helpful. If the primary takeaway from this conversation is what Michael and I just talked about, then you're already won today. And anything from this point forward is just some old dude babbling. So we're back into the cost, the dates. It's what everybody mutually agrees to. So one of the things about this contract, and I would encourage you to go through and read it. So in this particular case, we didn't need to mark any study periods, right? So far as soil or feasibility, because it was already getting built. But this is a really interesting insert into what VR has done. And I don't want to skew the conversation a little bit, but when we talk about new custom on Thursday, that path typically takes 2 paths. You do a contract to purchase on the dirt, on unimproved property, and then you move into the construction contract. What I like about this, this does have a built-in language in it, so you almost can use one contract if you want to use it as a feasibility study period or soil period. In this particular case, we didn't need it. It was already built. The soil work was already done, so forth and so on that, and you'll see that a little further on. All right. We have to do a disclosure just like anything else. So optional, hold on a second. So in this case, this was a spec or a particular model that they were buying. So we marked it off, and as we go a little further, we'll talk about what really consists of a real estate. It's going to be a new construction contract. To be frank with you, though this is super important, what we're building, the survey and the soil work and the specifications is the real important part of the contract, and these things all tie together. All right, so in this particular case, if you look at 15, you can put other terms. This particular case, this was contingent on the sale of another piece of property, which we were fortunate enough to put under contract. So that contingency actually has been removed since this was written. We particularly crossed off the lot section of it. That actually came from the builder on the other side. We presented the contract to the builder in this case. And we were fine with that. The house was already built. It wasn't, we weren't doing anything, looking at land first. So the thing is, the important part on 15 is you can put other terms in this. I will tell you, for the most part, builders don't negotiate at the moment anyway, and this may change because of COVID-19. They typically don't negotiate price. What you can negotiate is sometimes it's features or add-ons or change orders, right? Granite top at half price or something along those lines, and or some builders will contribute for closing costs. And you'll see later on, that's what we did in this one. So we had our normal acceptance, normal fund signatures. Oop. So we put an addendum to this particular contract. So this was, you know, part of the negotiating process. What happened with that is we ended up negotiating a $10,000 seller concession, and where the negotiation ended up was, you know, the seller was cool with it as long as the net to the seller didn't go below a certain amount, which was contingent upon appraisal, which we actually just got back, so it actually worked out worked out okay. Excuse me. All right. Summary rights, disclosure. Okay, we had a pre-qual letter. This is crossed out because we had a second one. So this particular house was listed, and the funny thing, it wasn't listed in our MLS. It was listed in Michael. What's CVR? What MLS?
Say that again.
What MLS is CVR?
That's Central Virginia. That's Richmond.
Richmond, got it.
Yeah.
So this was in the Richmond MLS. And I think so. This one, I believe, is 2%, Michael. I think you're right on this one. I have to double check on it. But if it's listed, then you can pull the listing out depending on which MLS it's in. 2.5%. Sorry. So now we're kind of into the, you know, my builder brain, the things that are important to it. You know, the contract for the most part is pretty similar to what we're used to as far as regular real estate. You know, we're contract of real property. You know, that's the same contingencies and home inspections and so forth and so on. What's important here is, from my perspective, what am I buying, right? Because it isn't, in this case, it started, but for most cases, it's not already started yet. So what am I buying? So I need a survey. In this case, it was lot 13, which is here. So we have a survey. And again, in this particular case, we had a proposed building site, which was already under construction, but we knew where our septic field is. This has the proposed well site. Just those who are not used to looking at site plans, see this little dotted line right here? That's your building setback. So that means in the future, if this client wished to build a garage, detached garage of some sort, it has to be beyond this, as it's away from Route 33. But can't go beyond that line. Okay. So you should always have a survey. You should always have where my house is going to be. If they can't provide that for you, you have to make it contingent, right? You just want to make sure you know what you're buying, dirt-wise. Okay.
And Keith, with the builders that you're talking about, most of those, I mean, for the most part, the lots have had to been pre-surveyed to get the master plan, right?
Correct. So
they should be able to show it to you, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. This is a little small builder and a little small development in Louisa County. But Michael's 1,000% correct. So if you're doing Stanley Martin in Westfield, what's the one in Crozet? Westfield, right?
Western.
Western, whatever it is. So in a Stanley Martin or Ryan project or whatever like that, Michael's 1,000% right. All the site plan has to been done. The plats have been recorded. If it's, in this particular case, it has central water and sewer in it. And you'll see a little later, all the perk tests were done. Well sites and locations were specified on it. So in a city environment, right, with a central water and sewer, you would not necessarily have that because it's already been connected to the system on it. So again, site plan is important, but the contract itself, site plan, in this particular case, there was a handout that we included to it that I wanted to make sure everybody understood what they were buying, right? And there's a set of standard features or specifications. And when we next Thursday talk about the custom, you'll find the specification sheet is going to be much longer on this. But usually what you'll get is you'll get a specification sheet, a survey, and a rendering of what the house is going to look like, where the rooms are going to be. In this case, we actually had a set of blueprints, which I attached. So more is better in this case. Now, in this case, they've already selected all their light fixtures. So all this conversation happened long before we got to the contract. So again, this house was like framed up by the time we bought it. So they made all their selections. The builder made them. So our buyer actually had 0 selections to make because he bought it at this particular point in time. If you buy something off of the ground, particularly with Stanley Martin or Ryan, then there's a whole process that you go through, the client goes through. And talk about that for a little bit. You know, it depends on the level of comfort with your client, right? Some real estate agents just hand it off and kind of stay on the periphery of it. We don't. We let our buyer move us forward on how we want to communicate and be part of it with them. In most cases, they'd like us to be part of it. So because we've built up this trusted advisor thing, and folks just prefer to have us at the table. But that service is how you prefer to do it with your particular client. So again, this is all, you know, whatever data you have, that's what you want to include into it. And you want everybody to sign off on it. And you want everybody to understand it. And you want to make sure your client understands what they're buying. Because what you don't want to do is when you start walking through the house at the closing end of it, and we're saying, blah, 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 blah. I'm on bathroom fixtures, tile, shower, master bath, fiberglass, soaker tub, and master bath. All of a sudden you walk into that finished product and it's a fiberglass shower instead of a tile shower. Everybody starts doing this, and we go back to these documents and say, well, hold it, time out. I paid for a tile shower. Then we start doing what Lee was talking about. What we do best is problem solving. So it's just the process is just way more detailed than if you were doing a regular purchase because the house is there. Everybody knows what they're buying. In this particular case, you really need to make sure you've got all your ducks in a row. And little Mr. Muppet just came home, so everybody has a little 1.5-year-old running around.
Hey, Keith,
Yeah.
Keith, what happens if you do see that it's fiberglass instead of tile? Like what, you know, do you just deduct money or do they actually change it?
That's negotiations. That's between what everybody feels comfortable with it. And that's a great question, Logan. So I would recommend, you know, what I do is I do multiple visits to the home. So we're actually going to ride out to Louisa Saturday morning, actually, because they're setting all their trim stuff. And I just want to make sure it jives with this thing. And so personally, I go out and check periodically. Now, you know, it's what service you wish to provide to your client. I mean, there's no set rules in this process. As everybody on this call knows, it's better to catch a problem before it becomes a real problem on the front end than dealing with it on the back end of it. But, you know, it's a matter of what your client's prepared to do, right? You know, no, rip it out, redo it. That's my position. And everybody starts having the conversation. Was that a good enough question?
That's perfect. And then earlier I asked a question about a lot of times they will give you 2% instead of 3%. But if you have a signed buyer broker agreement for 3%, and then the notes you say you agree to pay me, which I didn't do in my last brokerage because I didn't have the language. So I'd love a link to that little blurb just saying includes VRBO and whatever. what do you, is it, are you actually then getting paid 2% or 3%?
So let me answer that, Keith.
Thanks, Michael.
You're getting paid 2% because that's what the builder's offering. Because if you look at the language in the exclusive right to represent, it says 3%, including what is offered by the seller. So in this situation, including would be the 2%. So 3% minus 2% means you've got a delta of 1%. You either just agree to be paid 2%, which in all honesty is what most people do. Or if you want to have those standards, you say to the folks, look, I'm going to show you property, it's 3%. And you would have this conversation. You would say, but some new home and some resale homes offer less than 3%. If that's the case, then I will be looking to you to make up that additional, meaning the buyer. And you know, some buyers are going to say no, and then you've got to make a business decision as to whether or not you want to work with them or not. But I will tell you that the vast majority go with what has been offered in the MLS.
Michael, thank you for tackling that. So
yeah, and the only other thing I'll say, Logan, is maybe during one of the AHA classes, I'll do a class on handling commission objections, and we can get into that more thoroughly versus taking the time now.
And then the only other thing, Keith, that I had a friend who bought new construction over in, where is that pool where all the kids live? It's Belvedere. And the builder went out of business, and they ended up with doing 2 bay windows and all this termite damage, and they never had like a buyer representation on their side, right?
Yep.
So that they ended up having to pay, I guess the homeowners insurance paid for part of it, but they never poured a foundation. So is there a time, obviously you have this great checklist with what features you're picking. Is there a time when you can sort of, how does the like inspection or checking that they're doing it right, is that part of your value?
Logan, I'm going to try to ask you to ask that question a little differently because you kind of lost me halfway through it. Okay. So break it down a little.
Is there any
into
time?
A couple of parts. Okay. I lost you, Logan.
You're lagging for me.
Oh.
Sorry, it might be my connection. Can you hear me?
I got you.
Sorry, a lot of people on in my house right now. Is there a period in time when you can review like the inspection to make sure that, like, I don't know, or do you bring in a home inspector? Like, just tell me a little bit.
So that's a great question. Okay. So because it sounded like to me you had pre-closing and post-closing in the same question. Let's just talk pre-closing before we actually close the house. So that is, yes, you can have a home inspector come in there, and I would encourage you to do that. And I would encourage you to have that conversation with the builder. I will tell you the national guys do allow that. There's a very specific process that it has to go by. And there's also very specific home inspectors that are licensed to do new construction. So normally what you would do is what's called a pre-drywall inspection, right? So you would, prior to the drywall being hung, you and however you're organizing your closing, you know, if you're using Justine, she handles that for you as far as scheduling goes and all that fun stuff. If you're not, then it's something you need to manage. But that's what happens. You, prior to drywall, actually prior to insulation is what it really is. You do a home inspection, and they go through that whole house. So even though it was inspected by the building inspector, and I'll tell a little bit of story about that at the back end of this comment, the home inspector is the best person to come in there and do that. And they'll create a list just like you would do in a regular home inspection, and then you do a normal Herker, and you give that list to the builder, and you make sure that list gets done. And then the home inspector comes back, or however you wish to verify it. I recommend that the home inspector comes back and says, okay, we're good, right? So I've done this with Stanley Martin or whatever these production guys are. And personally, I caught it, but we had a home inspection. There was some steel problems, structural problems in the basement that somebody just missed something that happens. And anytime you have more sets of eyes on something, that's a good thing. And then will happen at the back end of it, just before closing, you would have your normal home inspection process. So it's a little bit more expensive, but it's well worth the money. And that goes back to the value that we add as real estate agents or realtors into this process, right? So we'll kind of rally back a little bit to that. Because if you weren't there at this process or part of this process, Logan, you wouldn't be able to advise your client, hey, oh, by the way, you can get a home inspection, because the builder's not going to do that, right? So that's a value right there that you know, you can catch stuff. So the second part of your question, I think, was a little bit post-closing. Does that sound right to me? Am I representing that right?
Yeah, but I think what I was really asking was the front end, so you just answered it.
Got it, yeah.
Thank you.
Back end, you know, that's a lawyer question, because once it's closed, it's closed.
One thing, I think, is it pretty normal that during the building process, there are certain times that the buyers go in and make further, I don't want to say selections, but like when they're ready to do the electrical, you go through and point out where you want things, and like pre-drywall, like that's
Great comment, Barbara. It depends on the builder, right? So your personal experience was a little bit different because it was a smaller builder, right? But when you do something like one of the national guys, all those selections are all pre-made before the project gets started, right? So that you go into a selection center, and so depending on which builder you're talking about, you know, I think both Ryan and Stanley Martin have a 14-day window, right? There's a structural, you know, all your selections, your colors, and you go into and Southern does the same thing, right? You go into their facility and that's it, you're done, you finish it. And then the conversation we were having with Logan, that was more about, hey, is everything done right? Right? And then we're going to drywall it. So production guys, you don't get as many walkthroughs as you might with some of the smaller builders. But, and that's the whole purpose, I think, why Michael wanted to do this, and my hat's off to him, is it's so different. This is, you know, with residential contract to purchases, there's typically a path, right? We deviate a little bit, but, you know, builder A functions very different than builder B, and builder Z doesn't function at all, right? There's builders out there that you have no communicate. They won't communicate with you at all. So, you know, it's kind of like your client. You got to know your builder. You got to know how they operate, how they function. So I think we recommended this once before. If you're really going to be helping new construction post COVID-19, when you feel comfortable and safe to do it, I'd wander around and check some jobs out. All right. Any other questions before I continue to move along? No? Brian, are you sleeping with your eyes open? That's a joke, Brian.
I'm getting it. I'm getting this. I got here.
I'm sorry?
I've got a full page of notes here. I'm getting it.
Oh, good.
I appreciate it.
There you go. So everybody say hello to little Harry. All right. So
anything on the screen? Right now, I'm just seeing Zoom written across a blank screen. Did I do something wrong?
Might be. Everybody else, I think, is seeing something from Balasar and Associates. Is that true?
You may have exited out by accident, Barb.
Okay. Is there something? Okay. I'm still on, but I don't. Okay.
So I really don't want to complicate this conversation with this next document too much. This particular piece of property has an alternate septic system on it, and we could probably talk about for 2 hours the difference between it. But very simple terms, this is not a traditional gravity fed system. This is basically a little mini sewer plant that Ravenna or Lake Monticello or the city of Charlottesville have. And so the only key thing to know from our perspective is the fact that there is one there. In this particular, and that's the reason that was important to include it in this project, it requires yearly inspections and so forth and so on. So if anybody ever gets caught into one of these alternate, just call me offline and I'll help you through it. But what's important here is we have the septic system document. So this is the permitted for the septic system for that particular house. That's really all we need to know for the number of bedrooms, and we want to make sure the number of bedrooms match with the actual house. Sometimes there's slip-ups in the system, right, from a county or state perspective or city perspective that all of a sudden
Uh-oh.
yeah, hang on a second. Hang on.
Uh-oh.
Hang on.
We got weird things going on now. I feel like I'm playing Space Invaders.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm not the only one.
No, it's me. It's me. It's the app that I use when I do it via Bluetooth. It shuts you out in an hour. So I've been over an hour. So I just needed to reboot it.
Glad to have you back.
And I'll switch the phone up so everybody can watch the girls and them eating lunch downstairs. It's okay. I'm working. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it, guys. I'm working. It's okay. Somebody's gonna make money. So this happens to say a 4-bedroom house. So again, it's just simple stuff. You know, if you look at, do your basic homework, right? If you look at, your builder gives you this and your plan says a 5-bedroom house, and this says 4 bedrooms, you know, you raise your hand up and say, whoa, time out. This isn't matching. And it could be a simple clerical error, or it could be, hey, we really don't have a septic system designed for 5 bedrooms. Then we got to have that conversation. All right, so this is just more fun stuff, right? This is all useless stuff that I actually know. So this is their authorization to sell. So I always, what I did in this particular case, since it was contingent on selling another piece of property, I got permission from our client to add our listing agreement in there so that the seller, the builder, felt comfortable about it. And we gave them the CMA and all that stuff. It sounds like I got a house full of people, and I apologize for that, folks. Let me see, what else do I got here? Yeah, that's the listing agreement.
Hey, Keith, what happens if their house didn't sell
So-
and you entered into this agreement?
Yeah, great question. So it's a contingency. There was a timeline, and then it just falls apart. That make sense?
Yeah,
It was a
Logan, you just write in, it's contingent for the sale of the home for 60 days or 90 days or whatever.
Right.
And if it doesn't sell, they don't move forward with the purchase.
Correct. So in the main body of the contract, thank you for chiming in, Michael. See this on the terms? We talked about that a little bit earlier, right? So this contract is contingent upon the sale and settlement of purchase of real property located at blah, 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 blah. Purchasers agrees to list publicly in market. So far, ratified listing agreement attached said property must be sold under contract within 60 days of April 15th, and the settlement must take place, so forth and so on into it. So that's the language. You just write the contingency in there for it. In this particular case, all he really needed to do was put it on the contract. He actually had enough cash and was able to Why, technically, he could have bought both houses without selling it, but we wanted to get this off of his back, which we did. The trick part on this, Logan, is how we're going to close house A and move into house B. That's the tricky part of this, particularly in new construction. In regular purchase, contractor purchase, it's even trickier, but new construction, it's hard. Positive thing about this particular transaction is the builder's 2 to 3 weeks ahead of schedule. Thank you, COVID-19. He's actually going to have the house finished 3 weeks before we need it. So guys, 10 minutes. A, was I helpful? B, you got any questions? And C, if you want to see little Harry, I'll show you around. Logan, I know you got questions.
Me?
I do have a lot of questions. So
Oh, well, I forgot. I got 2 Logans. I'm sorry.
sorry, I know, I'm sorry. I have a quick question. There was a house that somebody that I knew wanted to look at in Fox Chase that is pending. That was a very small builder, like Shenandoah Builders. It was the first house on the right off of 250. I don't know, Logan, if you went through it with me or if I was running around.
I know which house you're talking about.
Yeah, sort of the modern house. You know, he's not a big builder. Do we, you know, I would think that would raise a greater flag for concern about how it's being done. He's sort of an agent and he was an agent and a builder. Is that raise your antenna and you say you got to get a home inspector in there to take a look at it, or
Let me ask you a question. What level of completion is it at?
It was finished. It was finished.
So time out. If it's finished, it's just a regular contractor purchase.
Right. Okay,
That's
got it.
Regular contractor purchase. If it's finished,
yeah.
If it's CO'd, certificate of occupancy, right?
Right.
It's just like buying any other house. It just happens to be new. And yes, get a home inspection.
And Logan, the other thing
I guess
Logan, the other thing you do in that situation is ask the builder, can you provide me some names of a couple buyers or realtors that have worked with you in the past so that I can, you know, give my client the opportunity to talk to a couple of them.
Okay.
So the real question you're probably trying to, I would be asking is, tell me about your builder warranty. That's the question you want to ask.
Yeah, like how shoddy is it? That's sort of what I was asking.
I mean,
Yeah, or how good is it?
not all of us are bad.
That
just
sounds
so that you
terrible.
know.
God, I'm sorry.
Some of us are still recovering, but not all of us are bad. Yeah, so I just would have an honest discussion with them. You know, tell me about your builder warranty. So they're obligated to do it for 1 year, right? But that's only from the time it's CO'd forward, right? So if it was CO'd 6 months ago, then that builder warranty is only good for another 6 months, right? So it's not, how I would, if I was representing that client, right, Logan, how I would do it, I would either encourage, I would be part of. I got way too many people on the Wi-Fi.
You're lagging, Keith. I can't see. Or
No, yeah. Just give me a minute.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, just give me a minute. I got way too many people on the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, me too.
Hold on a second. I'm switching.
I have missed it, but when you were discussing the, I don't know if I'm on mute or not, taking that contract with contingency on new construction, what happens with all of the choices that have been made? I'm surprised that a builder would take a contingency when they have entered into those agreements with the buyer in the construction.
Fiona, that's a great question. While Keith kept coming back on, it's a great question. Most won't. Most want you to be non-contingent. They do not want to put a shovel in the ground and start building if they don't know you're there. But I think probably in this situation, because those folks could move forward if they needed to, that might have been communicated. But you know, in that situation, you got to, you know, maybe it's 120, maybe it's 150 days before it's going to close. So you got to have those conversations with your client to say, look, we can go non-contingent, but you got to be ready to go in 120, 150 days. So we have to be really competitive with our price. We're going to have our house in good condition so we can get it sold in the time period. The other thing you can do is oftentimes, if it's going to be a gap of 30 days or something, you can go to a lender and get what's called a bridge loan, which they could then go ahead and do it until their other house closed. And some people are going to be comfortable with that, and some people aren't. But you're right. Most of the builders are not going to accept a contingent contract.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Okay.
Any other questions for Keith that I can answer?
I have a question for Dr. Keith.
Go ahead.
This is not actually for Keith, but just because it just came up. If the house that's being sold is represented by another agent, and you're representing, well, in my case, the seller of a property, and you feel that their probably price is a little bit too high on the property that they're selling, and my clients have already found a new property and have a contract on it contingent on the sale of this other person's property listed with another agent.
Right.
Can you just, has anybody dealt with that, and how did they approach the other agent?
Yeah, so Keith handled that well in this particular example, in that fact that he provided not only the listing agreement, but he provided the CMA to show the builder that they were going to be priced well. So using your example, though, what you could do is, when you're thinking about accepting a contingent contract, you can say, I really need to see the comparables. I need to see what's sold, have things sold in the last 30, 60 days. And sometimes you even ask the buyer who's going to be selling their home, my clients would like to come by and tour your property. Right? Or at least you tour it so that you can see it's in good condition, it's got good curb appeal and that kind of thing. There's nothing that says that before you accept a contingent contract that you can't do your due diligence on the house.
Right.
You don't want to just accept it willy-nilly. You want to know that if we accept this, there's a good chance that it's gonna sell in the time period that you need it to sell.
Yeah, we have already accepted it, and listening to Lee Brown this morning,
Right.
I was thinking, she was saying they've had a lot of showings, but they haven't got an offer. And I was wondering, she was saying that little bit can make all the difference, that little bit of price.
No, it's just absolutely right. And when we talk about this and when we talk about contract negotiation, when you have to go in and write a contract contingent on the sale of the home, you are losing negotiating power, because you're basically, in my opinion, you're putting your hands in front of you, say, please accept our offer, which contingent on the sale of the home. And so the seller is even in more of a negotiating position at that point. And so you can be firm and say, look, we're willing to consider this, but we need to know that the house is going to be priced right. We're going to need to know that you've got it in good condition. We need to know that it's in a location that we feel like it's going to sell, because if you can't substantiate that for your client, you have no business accepting that contingency. Because you're just, whether we like it or not, you're effectively taking the house off the market. Now, given the fact that there's not as much inventory, it's not as bad right now, but when you change that from active to active with kick out, there are a lot of agents that aren't going to show your house anymore.
Funny you should say that, and I apologize, guys, for everybody with the video. We're with just a non-new construction. We just did a two-sided deal, selling a house and listing a house, which everything was contingent. I'm going to switch my video off for whatever reason. It's not working here. And so it was exactly like Michael said, and we were just very fortunate to sell one within the listing within, I think we had a contract within 8 hours or something like this. It requires a super amount of communication, just like Lee was saying. You have to communicate with everybody, make sure everyone's on the same page. They understand what they're getting themselves into, both on the buyer and the seller side. But in this particular new construction transaction, the house that our client was selling was literally 2 blocks down the street. So the builder knew it, they felt comfortable with it. So it was a very unique situation. I will tell you, if you go into a Stanley Martin or Ryan, they will not, for the most part, allow, that's not going to happen.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So I apologize for the video, guys. So you're just looking at some icon. I don't know why my camera's not working today, but and I know why I got kicked out, because I only set this thing for an hour, so I had to reset it. And anything I can help from the new construction side of things? Any more questions that I may be helpful for?
Is it typically more expensive, Keith, to go to have your clients go to a builder like a Ryan and pick a lot and a house that way versus buying a lot of land separately and having to find a builder to build on it?
Great questions.
Yeah.
I know you're going to cross over some of that next week, but just
No, but that's a good
2-minute
segue.
question.
That's a great segue into next week. So the short answer of it is if you buy in a subdivision, typically what you'll do is you'll get more square footage for less money. It's generally how it works. And you'll find out when we talk about, there's a custom new construction we're doing in with Bramante Homes in, I guess, south of town of where we bought the lot first, negotiated the contract for the house and the plans and, the total package. But I'll tell you straight up, if you're going to custom, guys, you need to be thinking $200 a square foot, not including the dirt in today's environment. And I just got an email from a couple of my builder buddies, bless you, my builder buddies, dirt is going, lumber prices are going through the roof. So kind of think about this a little bit like anytime there was a hurricane in Florida, plywood and drywall. So that's what's happening. You're starting, and at the time I dig up the graph, but we're starting to 2x4s, which is pretty much what everybody kind of gauges the cost by, are kind of going up. So actually this particular client that we're going to talk about next Thursday was like everybody else. Well, I'm going to sit tight and wait till Corona's over with. These people were a little bit smarter, or not smarter, but saw that this was tracking out, and they actually going to ratify the contract tomorrow because the builder is going to lock in the price and absorb any increase in lumber. But if they would have waited 2 months from now, they would be paying that difference. So if you have any people on the fence on new construction, I would encourage them to get off the fence.
And Logan, that goes back to the conversation you and I had yesterday in regards to, you can go out and find the land, and Ryan, we've had this conversation too. You can go out and find that land, but you got to understand that it's not 120 days or 150 days. It's a year. It's a year and it's 15 months, because you got to get the permitting, you got to get the site plans, and Keith will talk about this more next week. But the point being is, you have no idea what the interest rates are going to be, construction costs, things like that. Whereas going back to your question, Logan, if you can get to Craig or Stanley Martin or Ryan or one of those folks, and they've got one ready and want to start building, you're going to be able to nail down those costs in a way right now that you can't 6 months from now.
I didn't even think about
I didn't know.
price. I didn't.
Remember when I talked about yesterday that even if you want to be at this number and everybody agrees to the number, it almost always is going to be more because something's going to happen.
Never happens. Never stays at the number you started at.
And Keith, isn't it true that in the builder contract, most of the custom builder contracts, it's in there that the purchaser is going to bear that weight of something.
Sure.
There may be a percentage of contingency, but beyond that, all bets are off.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that next thing, but it's a change order clause.
Right.
Right. And they're a new, custom stuff. I will tell you, if you're at X dollars, I would encourage to tell your client to add about 10% to it, just in their back pocket, because they'll spend it. So any other questions, guys? No?
Keith, thank you very much, man. Really,
Other
really.
builders.
Oh, hold on a second. I think we had another question there. You had a question? Somebody was asking?
Yes, Keith. Are there many builders? I only have heard of one that will package, you find the land and then they package it together and build the house. And I've never done that, and I don't know how that all works.
I've lost you there a little bit on the audio, but that,
If somebody finds the land and
Yeah.
then they find a builder, I believe like ING Builders, and they actually
They're gone.
bundle the whole project of land and the house.
do you want to say that, Michael, again?
Sorry.
Yeah. So Fiona, that's what he's going to talk about next week.
Oh, good.
Tune in
good.
for that.
Okay.
But as an example, that company is out of business because of what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
Um,
So
They're what?
that builder that you mentioned is no longer in business.
Oh. Well, that's good to know.
So
About three,
happening.
Keith, about 3 years ago, right?
something like that. So look, I mean, Fiona, it's a great question though, right? Because your client will ask you that. And it used to be common
Yeah.
practice. You know, that's what I did, right? I had a $10, $15 million line of credit, and that's what we just did. And, you know, and it worked really well for us up until it didn't. And then, but you'll find most builders will not do that on a custom environment. And we're going to talk about this tomorrow. I don't know of any that still do that.
Okay,
You know,
great.
so the conversation we'll have next week, just so they get me thinking a little bit about it. For the most part, they're going to want you to buy the land free and clear, right?
Mhm.
Or however you want to do it.
Mhm.
And then they're going to have a builder
Mhm.
line of credit to build the house. And sometimes you know, you're going to have to put 10 or 20% cash in. And some people will say, hey, I'll allow you to put a first deed of trust on the property, which is equal to my deposit. So, you know, it's a little, customs are very, very different animals. The one we started today, it's, to most part, it's very similar to what we normally do, with just a couple extra steps. Does that make sense?
Yes. Mm.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, hey, I hopefully will be able to figure out my video for next. Actually, I got to figure it out in 20 minutes. But okay, guys, I'm gonna end it. Thanks for everything.
Thank you,
Great.
Keith, very much.
All right. Be well, guys. Bye bye now.
Michael.
Bye.
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 Appreciate it.